America, Kathleen Sullivan. Kathleen is an incredible thing. She was one of the pioneers in abstinence education. She lived on the North Shore of Chicago. That's where Bear grew up. And she would get into these impossible to get into schools in the south side of Chicago, you know, Obama's neighborhood. She was in there teaching the chastity message, the abstinence message. At one point, by the way, she never went to high school.
No, she never went to college. She did go to high school.
I've got it right now. She never went to college. So she's being interviewed on Oprah Winfrey, right there in Chicago. And Oprah said, Kathleen, where did you go to law school?
Where did you go to law school?
You never even went to college.
Yeah.
So then, in retirement, she and Barry's husband moved down to Naples, Florida, thinking they were going to retire and live happily ever after. But you know, if you're an activist, you never do that. You can't. So she started this incredible abstinence education program in Collier County, which is around Naples, and doing incredible work. I'm sure Barry will touch on it. Barry's been a great pro-life activist at a very young age, in his early 30s. He ran for Congress. That's when I got to know him. I actually met him here in Washington at a Wanderer conference way back in probably about, I think it was probably 1985.
Yeah.
Anyway, please welcome Barry Sullivan, nuclear engineer and a doctor product.
Thanks, Jeff. Is the mic good? Okay. What I like to do is try and have a little bit of interaction so everybody's just eating and everything, so you can always think that I'm going to ask you a question, so you really got to pay attention. If somebody asks you, what's your major goal in life, the one goal that you want to achieve, what would it be?
Go to heaven.
Go to heaven, right. What's your second goal, which is connected to the first goal?
It's your family.
Get as many people as you can to heaven. So the question is, how do we do that? Okay? So what I'd like to do is try and give you things in my life that have helped me focus on that, have inspired me to find out what are the things that have, I think, helped me get involved in the pro-life movement, concentrate on those first two goals. Now remember, when Pilate said to Jesus, "Are you a king?" what was his response? The reason I came into the world is to testify to the truth. And I think what you are doing today and this week, you're emulating the Lord. Okay? So when people are flipping you off or giving you negative responses, just remember Jesus caught the same thing before you did. But that's his purpose, was to testify the truth. So when you're doing that, you can be sure that you're on the way to your first and second goal. The Lord also said, if you deny me before men on earth, I will deny you before my Father in heaven. When we remain silent on the issues of the day, the moral issues of the day, that's what we're doing. We're denying the Lord. Okay, and we're going to be held accountable for that. You being here this week is the opposite of that. Okay? When you're in a group of people and somebody says, I think it's a woman's right to choose, and you remain silent, you're denying the Lord. Okay? As Christians, as Catholics, we have to take a stand. So what I'd like to do is try and inspire you what you have to know, how you can present it to different people to make the biggest difference you can. Statistics, real quick. 85% of those confirmed in the 8th grade will leave the church by the time they're 21. 85%. Roughly 30% of Catholics attend Mass weekly. The number of suicides exceeded gun deaths in 2015, and the numbers are getting worse. Last year, approximately 70,000 people died of opioid or drug overdoses. 70,000 people. I would contend, and no one's ever done a study on this, a lot of these people did not understand those two goals. Okay? Life became a tragedy or boring or whatever. And I think that's how a lot of them got into the drugs. So I want to give you a few scenarios now. It's Christmas Eve, and you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and your cousins are visiting, and there's a fire going on. What do? You're new to this. What would you do? Get everyone up and get them out, right? You're not going to sit there and go, let's see, I'm only 13 years old. My uncle's going to be all mad at me if I wake him up in the middle of the night. You're going to get him out. No question in your mind, right? Okay, second scenario. You're going on a vacation with your family at 2 o'clock in the morning. You arrive at the hotel. You're on the 6th floor of the hotel. You wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning to a fire alarm. You open the door. The hallway is filled with smoke. So your dad or you decide to go left. Unfortunately, the exit was to the right. You all die. Okay? So what was different in those two scenarios, right? Everybody lived the first one, everybody died in the second one. There's 4 things you need to save people. 1, you have to recognize the danger. 2, you have to know how to mitigate the danger. 3, you have to care about the people that are involved. And 4, you have to have the courage to act. In the first one, you knew what the danger was. You knew what you had to do to mitigate. You knew where the exits were, and you cared about the people. In the second one, you didn't have the knowledge, even though you cared and had the courage to act, you didn't have the knowledge to save everybody. Okay? Next scenario. You're at your family get-together, and your 19-year-old cousin has just come back from college, and he says, you know, he's decided he's just not going to eat. So what do? Hopefully, everyone's going to go, hey, that's going to cost you your life. You really should eat, right? So let's pretend everybody would do that. The second one, he comes back and he says, well, you know what? I'm selling drugs now. I'm making $5,000 a week selling drugs. What would you do? Hopefully you're going to tell him, hey, here's all the negative effects. You could get killed. You go to prison for the rest of your life. You're going to help kill people. You're going to lose your soul. Okay? Next scenario. Your college-age cousin comes back and he says, you know, you ask him, how's the church on campus? Well, I don't go to church anymore. I don't really need that. You know, I'm one with God and I'm a pretty good person, so I don't really need to go. What do you say? What would you say to him? Anybody? Go ahead.
Well, in terms of I'm a pretty good person, the Word of God says all of men's works are as filthy rags before God, so that no one can boast. So none of us are really going to be good enough, or we wouldn't need Jesus as our Savior.
Right. Okay, as Catholics, this is what I tell them. When a rich young man asks, what do I have to do for everlasting life? What does Christ tell him? Anybody? Sell everything. Do you know that 95% of the people that I talk to say that? That's not what he says first. That was the second thing, if you would be perfect. The first thing he says is, obey the commandments. The third commandment is keep holy the Sabbath. For Catholic, that means you go to Mass. Okay? The second thing, he says, unless you eat the body of the Son of Man, you cannot have life within you. So you're spiritually dead. So if you care about your cousin, you will say to him those 2 phrases. Okay? And another thing, let's pretend like the Lord came to you in the morning and said, you're going to die tonight at midnight, okay? Now for those of you who have families, you would probably say to your wife or spouse or kids, you give them your last instructions, right? Here's what I think is the most important that I want you to follow. If you're kids, you'd probably tell your parents the last most important thing. What did Jesus do right before he went into his passion? What did he give us?
Eucharist.
The Eucharist. It's the last thing he did before he started his passion. So if you decide you don't want to go, you're telling the Lord, even though I would do the most important thing before I was going to die, you didn't know what you were doing, Lord, because I've decided it's really not that important. Okay? We need to confront people in a charitable way so they recognize this. Somebody says, or I've asked this question, how many, raise your hand, if one of your friends or cousins was getting married in a gay marriage, would you go? How many people would go? It's really going to hurt your relationship with your families if you don't go. Believe it or not, over half the people I talk to, people who come to my talk, would go to the marriage. Okay? Now I would say, what do you say to a person like that? Well, Jesus said that's why they were created, male and female, that a man should leave his mother and father and a woman her home, and the 2 shall become one. That's all you got to say to somebody. Okay? So basically, you're contributing to them going against a direct command of the Lord himself. Okay? Now, your friends or those people may not listen to you, but our job is to put out the truth and try and make a difference in their lives. Okay? And there are people, when you don't go to the wedding, who you're going to lose their friendship. You might lose their family friendships.
It says don't call evil good and good evil. So by going,
You're condoning it.
condoning it.
Absolutely. That's the point. When you go, you're condoning it. You're saying a good Catholic like you is going, so it must be okay. So the people who aren't Catholic or the people who are sort of Catholic go, hey, somebody who's a very good Catholic is going, it must be okay. So you are jeopardizing your soul by going to that. Okay? That's how you have to feel about this. Now you might say, what's the big deal? Why should I really have to worry about other people's souls? Well, I sort of thought that when I was in high school. I went to a Jesuit high school, and there was a group of about 8 of us. Used to go to Mass every day. Okay, it was really nice. We had it at lunchtime, and I'm sitting there thinking, boy, I'm a pretty holy person. This is really great. Unfortunately, I had a friend named Paul. I won't use his last name. And he was a druggie. We all knew he was a druggie. He would show up on Monday mornings and his bloodshot. Very nice guy, but he was a druggie. Well, I never said to Paul, hey, Paul, maybe you should worry about your soul. Maybe God's got plans for you. By the time he was 22, Paul was dead of a drug overdose. Okay? So for 38 years, I see Paul's face. When somebody says something where I should be taking a stand, the Lord puts Paul's face in front of me as a reminder that we all can make a difference. Final hour, I don't know how many of you know of St. Tarcissus. He was a 14-year-old boy who, in pagan Rome, when they were killing Christians, and what they would do is they'd consecrate a bunch of hosts, and then the deacons would take it throughout the city. And the deacon had fallen sick. So Tarcissus was, I believe, 13 or 14. He said, I'll take the Eucharist. And they said, nah, it's too dangerous. We really don't want you to do it. But he did. And he was going through the marketplace, and some 16 or 17-year-old boys in a gang saw him, and they ripped open his cloak, and the Eucharist fell on the ground. And as he leaned over to pick him up, they beat him to death. So you got to think about that when you're thinking, maybe I don't need to go to Mass. Or maybe I don't need communion. There are people who have died for that. So at our final judgment, either God's going to say St. Tarcissus was an idiot, or he's going to say maybe you should have taken the Eucharist a little more seriously. I think it's going to be the latter. Okay? Facebook. That is a great place to make comments on videos, etc. For some reason now, I get pro-abortion videos and pro-life videos. And the comments after the pro-abortion ones are just, I mean, they're unbelievable. And this woman decided to have an abortion, and so I commented, well, gee, it's really a shame, so life was snuffed out. So she said, until you can have a baby, don't talk to me about abortion. Well, using that logic, then we can't stop slavery or segregation because I'm not black, and I haven't experienced that. Or if a woman wants to hit her 1-year-old with a baseball bat, I can't stop it because I've never had a child. But you have to be able to fight back with people. In a charitable way, bring those things up. And the woman says, well, it's my body. Well, actually, it's not. It's God's body. It's God's 2 bodies. And the woman is only in charge of that body. She's the steward for a short period of time compared to eternity. Okay, so I said that. Bring God into it. Pardon me?
Without you being a man, there'd be no baby.
Right. Exactly.
You wouldn't have that second body in the first place.
Right. That's true. But the point is, we have to take them on. Bring God into it. Okay? So this person said, well, what if I don't believe in God? I said, whether you believe in God or not, you will face a final judgment. Because as Bishop Sheen once said, nobody's an atheist. Everybody believes in God. You can't look around nature and not believe in God. Okay? They don't want to live according to God's laws. So we cannot allow them to say, well, I don't believe in God, so let's argue on the material end, because you'll never win that argument. Okay? The Nazis were based on that. The Soviet Union was based on that. They killed the people that were of no value. Okay? If we killed all the people on welfare, we'd cut government spending. Okay? We can't make those arguments. We have to be willing to say, and you know what? I was arguing with this guy for about over a day. About 5 or 6 things went back and forth, and he was 26 years old and male, and he said, "You win, buddy," with a smiley face. Now, I'm not telling you that because I want you to think I'm a great guy, but nobody had ever said to him, "Hey, what if you were that unborn child?" Or taking the time to make us think like Christ has asked us to think. So what I try to do is come up with 7 guiding principles that focus me every day to try and do what I think the Lord wants me to do. The first one, and if you leave here with anything, this is the one I really want you to remember. Live each day as it may be your last. Think of the last 4 things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell. The second one, see Christ in everyone, including yourself. See everyone as the only witness at your final judgment. I always visualize the final judgment for myself, and I think of the Lord's going to turn to every person that I've ever interacted with and is going to say, "Okay, mailman, did he ever treat you with human dignity?" Like, I know my mailman has 2 kids. He's married and has 2 kids. Okay? Very few people, he told me, ever ask him about his family. Because I visualize he's going to be there at my final judgment. The people we interact with on the street, your teachers, the garbage man, whoever. If you think like that, the final judgment, those people are going to be there. You'll find that every time you treat somebody well, you walk away with the joyful feeling that, yeah, my final judgment, that person is going to be in my corner. Okay? Fourth, we are born next to what I call the selfish tree trunk. And what that is, it's like a big oak tree standing out in the Shenandoah Valley. And we're all standing right next to it, and it's so close, that's all you can see. And every time you volunteer for something, like coming on a Face the Truth tour, you step back from the trunk and you get to see the beauty of the Shenandoah Valley. Okay? Now, there's always a chance that you could fall off a branch, but there's always a branch below. Like somebody flips you off, or somebody says something else to you, something very negative. You lose a friend or whatever. But if you stay close to the tree, you get to the end of your life and you go, what was the purpose of my life? And that's when people start getting into drugs, they commit suicide or whatever, because they've gone through life and have never stepped back and done the Lord's work and seen the beauty of life. Every day we make a commitment to serve God or ourselves. We are either getting closer to or further from God. There are no plateaus in your relationship with Him. It's God's body, not yours. You are just a steward for an unknown time. And the final one, life is an orchestra, and I see God is the conductor, and His Blessed Mother is right there. Then in the front rows, there are the great saints. And then everybody who's living and who's died is in the orchestra. And I'm about 10 billion rows back. But you know what? The people around me will hear my music more than they're going to hear Archbishop Burke or the popes. Okay? And God knows if I'm playing my music. When you put something positive on your Facebook, people around you are affected by that. If you don't play your music, they don't play as well. Okay? So everything you do, people should be going, wow, I want to be part of that. Whatever motivates her or him, that's what I want to be. Okay? As opposed to, and that's why you should never be in a bad mood. Okay? Sometimes, parents tell me, yeah, my kid got up in a bad mood. And, when I speak to young people, I said, there's no such thing as a bad mood. Okay? And I always ask them this. If your mother had cancer, would you treat her better than you do? You said yes. That's the wrong answer. It's nice that you would, but you should think that everybody is going to be taken from you in a car accident today. And you should go home and tell your parents, hey, Dad, Mom, thanks for putting a roof over our head. Okay? Thanks for a car. You know, we drove old cars when I was growing up. And one time, I still remember, I said something about getting a newer car, and my dad was very upset about it. And then I thought about it, it's like, and I happened to drive by a bus stop where people were waiting for the bus. Not that I look down on people who take the bus. But you can always think of somebody who has it better than you or worse than you. As you try to save your soul, you're trying to think of how can I help you see God better. And there's one thing parents want more than anything, and that's appreciation from their kids. Okay? There have been, by getting involved in CCD, we had a teacher at St. John Neumann just a couple years ago. Her son, they lived in North Carolina. His wife was like 7 months pregnant. He got in an argument with his neighbor. The neighbor ended up killing both the son and their pregnant daughter. And she came back after about a month, and she wanted to address all the kids. And she said, the only thing that kept us going was our faith. And it hit me. When things are going well, you have a job. I mean, I have a pretty great life. I got a job, got a lot of friends, I got my health, I have 3 grandchildren. It's a lot easier to be a good Christian. But it's when you hit the bottom, like they did, that people are really looking to you for your faith. And if you haven't invested in that faith, when the bottom event hits, whether it's losing a parent, a sibling, or whatever, it will crush you. So that's why we have to not only have strong faith, but we have to encourage others to do the same. So when the tragedies come, they can still make it. It's too late for a lot of people. I grew up so I got this in spades when I was very young. There was a mother there with 5 kids. She was a widow, and what had happened was she had 6 kids. They were up at a lake in Minnesota, and the oldest daughter dove into the lake and didn't come up. So the father dove in after her. Both of them drowned in the same accident. Okay? That woman's faith never wavered. And I knew them from when I was like 5 years old. That's the kind of faith that I want to have. Time and faith. I always ask everybody, if you were blind and you had cancer of the eyeballs, and I was the only doctor that give you your sight back, would you spend 15 minutes a day with me or talking to me, and then an hour on Sundays? And of course, I have the kids with their eyes closed, and I said, who would do that deal? And then, of course, everybody raises their hand. Then I said, okay, how much time do you spend with God every day? Unfortunately, the majority of them, it's less than 15 minutes. Okay? So in other words, they were willing to do something for me for something God had given them. And I said, you should always, every day, say, hey, Lord, this is pretty great. I can walk. I may not be the best athlete in the world, but man, it really is great being able to walk, being able to move my hands. Even though I need readers now, thank God I live in a time where they have glasses, right? As opposed to complaining, gee, I don't have 20/20 vision like some other people. It's just a way of life. The parable of the talents. We all remember that, right? The master gives them 5, 3, and 1. The 2 with the 5 and 3 invest their talents and get a return, right? They do things like this, okay? The other one gets 1 talent and he buries it. The master comes back, and what does he say? And they don't preach on this much. Said, yeah, here's your 1 talent back. I never did anything with it. Does the Lord say, hey, come on into the banquet, no problem, there's mercy for everybody? That's not what he says. He says, take the talent from him, bind him, and throw him out in the dark. Where there'll be grinding and gnashing of teeth. That's hell. Now, did he break any big commandments, like kill somebody or any? No. He did nothing with his life. And that's what we have to convey to people. God expects us to do something with our lives. For me, the last 4 things is the easy thing to think of. I was 13 years old and I was riding my bike home from football practice, and I lived on a suburb north of Chicago. And as I'm riding my bike home, I get to the train track crossing and the gate starts coming down, the bells and whistles and all that. And they actually had a little gate across the sidewalk. So being 13 years old and being really smart, I looked towards Chicago because that's where all the trains came from. It was 5 o'clock, right? I didn't see any trains, so I go around the gate, and lo and behold, all of a sudden, there is literally a train going 60 miles an hour as close as that wall. It was an Amtrak train that was coming from Milwaukee. And only by the grace of God was I not killed. I mean, it was so bad, my momentum just happened to get me across. The guy laid on his horn, and that almost blew me off I don't know if you ever heard a railroad engine horn, but those things are pretty loud. I got to the other side, and there was a woman in a convertible. She was white and hysterical. She'd almost seen somebody kill himself. And she says, "What, are you crazy?" I'm like, "No, just stupid." But it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. Because again, when I see moral situations arise, I see that train. Because God has said, you've got a purpose here. You've gotten 47 years more than you should have had. But it's the same with all of you, too. We're all here for a purpose. A lot of people, when I get into discussions, they say, well, Jesus wouldn't send me to hell for that. They'll be moving in together. Okay? Jesus wouldn't send me into hell for that. And I said, well, Jesus also told us, man has not seen, imagined what God has for those who love him. Right? That's what he told us. Right? Heaven for those. If you're saying God wouldn't send me to hell for that, you do not love Jesus. And I'll prove it to you. Think about when you met your best friend or your spouse, for those of you who are older. Did you say to yourself, okay, all I want to do is spend 30 seconds talking to them every day, and then they probably won't dump me? That wasn't quite how it was, right? You wanted to spend time to get to know them. And if they were really the one, you really wanted to spend a lot of time with them, right? So if you love God, you're spending time with them. You can't know somebody, you can't love somebody you don't know, and you can't know somebody you don't spend time with. So if you're not spending time with God every day, unfortunately, you do not love the Lord. So don't kid yourself. And your faith will be what you put into it. The last 4 things, I was part of the RCIA team at St. Francis of Assisi, and I was golfing on a Sunday about 8 years ago. And this couple came up, and they said, "Bear, do you remember us?" And I said, "I think you were at St. Francis of Assisi." And he says, "Yeah, you helped me go through the RCIA program." So we went back to our carts, and I got in my cart, and I turned to him, because we had switched to a different parish, and I turned to him and I said, "Oh, do you still go to St. Francis?" And he looks at his wife, and it's a Sunday afternoon, okay? And he says, "When we go." In other words, they hadn't gone to Mass. They don't go to Mass a lot. So I was about to turn away and I was like, I'll never see this guy again in my life probably. Why bother? But something told me, ask him. So I turned back to him and I said, "If you knew you were going to die tonight, would you have gone to Mass today?" And without hesitating, he said, "Yeah." I mean, he didn't argue. He didn't hesitate at all. But see, that's what we have to challenge. Just a simple, friendly question. What would you think? And I think that's one of the biggest problems we have today. We think we all have forever. And therefore, we don't have to get involved. One of the when I was 15, I heard a story of an elderly priest who went outside the concentration camps to find out how the people let happen what happened. And a lot of the people said we didn't know what was going on. So this priest found an older couple who had been there through the war. So he got talking to him, and he says, didn't you know what Hitler was doing? And with the camps, he says, no, it was all secret. And he says, well, when you saw the trains going into the camps, it sounds very different from when they were coming out and they're empty. He says, no, we really didn't. When you smelled the stench of the burning bodies, didn't you know what was going on? And then the mother said, Hitler was good for Germany. He got the economy going again. And the priest looked at him and he said, then you did know. Well, we all know what's going on. It's been 47 years, 60 million babies are dead. And it's our job to make sure everybody else knows what's going on. And that's why we're out there. Okay? And God bless you guys for doing it. But we have to keep doing it because we don't want anybody ever to be able to say they didn't know. See Jesus Christ in everyone, including yourself. I've never used drugs, I never smoked, and I really don't drink that much alcohol. I firmly believe that your health is a gift from God to be used for Him. And if you don't do that, you're going to pay a price at the final judgment. Okay? It's easy enough for us. We're all going to have different maladies in our life for even if we don't make bad choices. So don't make bad choices. And your friends, if you see them making bad choices, you should say something like, you know what? God's got plans for you. Don't mess it up with drugs. Don't mess it up by getting involved with somebody prior to marriage. And as far as marriage goes, when I was midshipman, we got together with other midshipmen throughout the country. And there was several others from different schools. I had never met the guys before summer training. And so one of the guys, we're in San Diego, and he says, why don't we go out and see if we can get some girls for not good things, right? So I said to him, I said, do you have a sister? And he goes, yeah, she's a senior in high school. I said, if I came to visit you and I took your sister out and the next day I told you, hey, she was really great, I really enjoyed it, what would you do? Meaning I used her for sex, okay? And he says, I'd punch your lights out. So I said, oh, I get it. So we're going to use somebody else's sister, but God forbid anybody ever uses your sister. Okay? As Christians, we're supposed to think of everybody as our future wife or husband, our daughter, or whatever. Okay? That's how you have to do that. Tell Jack that. Okay, we were born standing next to the selfish tree. Just some of the examples of my parents got us involved. There was a handicap day out in Chicago. And what they do is they got about 400 or 500 handicapped together in different parts of the Archdiocese. And then they have entertainment for them and all that. So it was going to be right near our parish. So they announced, we need some people to come up and move around, wheelchairs and stuff like that. So I was 14 years old. So my dad, being a very democratic person, said, okay, we're going up there. And so me and my dad and my brothers, we all went up there. And the first thing they did said, Barry, would you take this blind person to the restroom? Now, I had never met a blind person before. We never talked down about blind people, but I just never met one. So, of course, I take his arm, and I think he sensed that I was nervous. So he says, oh, so how old are you? And I said, I'm 16. He says, oh, so you're in high school. Do you play any sports? I said, yeah, actually, I run track. He says, oh, what do you run? And what it hit me was, here was a guy that was worried about how I felt. He wasn't negative about his own blindness. He was thinking about, how do other people feel? How can I make other people see God? And the beautiful part was, he was a singer, so he entertained everybody. Just a beautiful God-given voice. You know, but had my parents not volunteered us to go up there, I wouldn't have had that experience with that blind person. And quite frankly, I wouldn't have thought, wow, here's a blind person who's very positive. I've got my eyesight, so maybe I should try and be positive too. Giving blood. My dad encouraged me to give blood when I was in high school. I ended up getting into giving platelets. So I actually have donated about 450 times. And I'm not telling you that because I want you to think, oh, he's a saint or anything like that. But every time I give, I think of the joy that God is using me to help him protect life. And I also, they always ask you, have you used illegal drugs? Not that I would have used illegal drugs, but I thought to myself, to use illegal drugs would have thrown away a beautiful opportunity to help God protect life. Okay, so it's another thing. Volunteering, I believe, helped me make better decisions. My twin sister, who now has 9 children, she had 2 at the time, volunteered at a pregnancy center. And without going into the whole story, that's how we ended up getting my daughter, Kristen, who now is married and has 3 wonderful grandchildren. Okay? Now, had my mother not taught us to be pro-life, my sister never would have volunteered at that pregnancy center, and I wouldn't have my daughter, and I wouldn't have my 3 grandchildren. So my point is, we do what we do because that's what God wants us to do. But he rewards you tremendously here on earth also. Now, my mom started this, as Jack talked about, an abstinence education program. She's now 85 years old, still doing that. She said, as Mother Teresa said, retirement is after death when it comes to doing the Lord's work. But my mom was having a Chicago school teacher write a book for her. And his wife already had 1 adopted child. And they were going to adopt this baby. Well, what happened was his wife got pregnant. And the birth mother said, do you know of another couple that would like to adopt my child? And that's how we got my son Nathan. Okay? So my mother, had she not gotten involved in writing an abstinence education for the public schools, which all 6 of our kids went to the private schools, so you could really say it wasn't her fight. But for my mother, everybody was family. Okay? Whether you're in the private or public schools, she saw a need, and that's why she did it. And because she did that, we got my son Nathan. Okay? So it's another example of getting involved. I ran for Congress in 1990. I'll just tell you about one story. At one of the, it came out in the press. It was in Southern Maryland where I was running. There was 8 people running. And I stated that I wouldn't allow abortion even in rape and incest. So, of course, the local newspaper, raked me over the coals, front page article. So the guy who was my campaign manager calls me one night and he says, this woman just came over to get her kids and she got out of her car and his wife, my friend's wife, ran a daycare out of her home. So this woman came to pick up her kid and says, Tony, you mean to tell me if I get raped and get pregnant, your candidate won't let me get an abortion? And so my buddy goes, now I know you're right, but explain it to me one more time. So I explained it to him, hey, none of us had anything to do with how we were conceived. If I was the child conceived in rape, I'd want to be born. So it's that simple. And so 2 days later, he calls me back, says, you're not going to believe this. I said, what? He says, well, she came back the next day. I told her exactly what you said. The next day, she came back and said, I'd like a bumper sticker for your candidate. Okay? Now, that was a perfect example of somebody who nobody had ever taken the time to go through the issue with her. Somebody who was radically against what we stood for. But because we explained it to her and just said, as Jesus said, treat others like you want to be treated. That's the basis of the Christian faith. But nobody ever says that, has the guts to say that, because they're afraid they'll be yelled at, whatever. But even this woman, and there was, I could spend hours telling you about others, but Operation Rescue, I took part in that, and there was a young couple there. I still remember their faces, 30 years ago, and the girl started tearing up, and as we watched women walking into the clinic, and I said, oh, you really feel bad for them? And she said, I was one of them about 6 years ago, and she could not get pregnant. So basically, she had killed the child that she had conceived and now was unable to get pregnant. Okay? I gave a talk at Hood College, and a woman came up afterwards and she said, I wish I had heard your talk 4 years ago when I was in high school, because I had 4 friends, senior year, decided to get abortions. I wouldn't have gotten an abortion, but I didn't have the courage or the knowledge to talk to somebody else. 3 of them are still psychologically destroyed. This was 4 years later. Some have gotten into drugs, and the 4th one I've lost contact with. Okay? But by you putting something on your Facebook page from Live Action, just a short video, you never know who's going to see that and share it on their Facebook page, and somebody who could have made the wrong decision because of what you did is going to make the right decision. And the last story I'll tell, it's getting late, we were on 355, which if you go up about 10 miles here, that's 355. And it was 7:30 in the morning, and this couple drove past us into the parking lot. And I thought, oh my gosh, somebody's going to start yelling at us and swearing at us at 7:30 in the morning. I haven't even had any coffee yet. So they sat there for about 30 seconds, then they got out. This was a Tuesday. They came over and they said, we just want you to know that we're not married. She's pregnant. We're going to work now, but she was scheduled for an abortion this Saturday. And because of your pictures, we're not going to do it. Now, if you get, and I know we've had it, you get one of those in your life, and you've probably done more than most people will do in their entire lives. Okay? And that's how you have to look at it. And that's why you want to get your friends involved so they can experience that joy. Okay? I've never had anybody tell me they weren't glad they came for the March for Life or did this. They came along. So twist your friends' arms. You'll be doing them a favor.